upon a time, there was a king and a queen who had everything they wanted except a child. One day, when the queen was in the gardens, she saw a hungry old beggar woman and gave her some food and rest. Before long, the queen was telling the old woman of her woes. "I may know a way to help you," said the old woman. "Tonight, when you bathe, you must wash in 2 pails of water. Afterwards, throw all the water under your bed before you go to sleep. In the morning, you will find 2 flowers, one red and rosy and the other one purple and wild as a weed. Eat only the red one and leave the other alone. Be careful you heed what I say." That evening, the queen did as she was told. The next morning, just as the old woman said, there were 2 flowers growing under her bed. The queen ate the red flower at once. It was so sweet and so delicious, she couldn't help but want to eat the other flower too. Before she knew it, she'd gobbled up the purple one too, and both flowers were gone. When the time came, the queen had not just 1, but 2 little girls. One was beautiful and delicate as a rose, and they named her so. But the other was reckless and unruly as a weed, with a shock of wild hair to match. They put a hood on her head as soon as she was born, hoping to tame her down, and she became known as Tatterhood. But the hood was no use. Tatterhood was unruly as ever. Before she could even walk, she started galloping around on a little grey goat with a big wooden spoon clenched so tight in her fist. They said she'd been born with it in hand. The 2 sisters were different as pickle and pie, but they loved each other dearly, and no one could ever keep them apart. One terrible day, just before they were all grown up, a frightful noise arose outside the palace walls. "Trolls!" cried the queen, as they all ran and hid under her bed. Trolls are a terrible nuisance for palaces because they love devouring young princesses, their favourite food in the entire world. These trolls were the most dangerous kind. From a cursed land beyond the 7 seas, they hunted princesses far and wide, gobbling up anything that got in their way. But Tatterhood wasn't your average princess and wasn't going to let some trolls get her goat, at least not without a fight. Whispering to the queen to keep Rose safe, Tatterhood squiggled out from under the bed, grabbed up a chamber pot and galloped out the door. Now, trolls also hate noisy children, which is why they always prefer to eat princesses who are, by comparison, mostly quiet and polite. When they saw Tatterhood come charging up on her little grey goat and heard her banging away with that big wooden spoon on that smelly old pot, well, they'd never seen anything like it, and they all started scrambling away in terror. When Rose heard all the noise, she grew worried. What if Tatterhood needed help? So Rose went to the door and poked her head out just as the last troll came running down the hall with a great axe. When the troll spotted Rose's pretty little head, he leaped up and with a great big swipe chopped little Rose's head off, then popped a calf's head back on instead. Trolls, you see, are tricky little creatures, always trying to cover up their gruesome ways, and will replace a princess's head with a calf's or a pig's or whatever else is handy. And you'd be surprised how many palaces never even notice. That's another story. Anyways, the wicked troll, pleased with his prize, ran off with a giddy little shriek, just as Tatterhood galloped back, only to find Princess Rose trotting about with a calf's head instead of her own. "Oh no!" shouted Tatterhood. "We've got to get Rose's head back." Rose gave a polite little moo, and though no one knew exactly what she'd said, Tatterhood was sure she agreed. But no one dared to go, not even the bravest of all the king's men. So Tatterhood demanded a ship of her own, and taking her sister by the horns, set sail over the 7 seas. After 7 days and 7 nights, they finally reached the land of the trolls, a wild, windswept place with a castle in the distance and dark cliffs all around. Leaving Rose safe on the ship, Tatterhood galloped ashore, where she met a king's horseman and announced, "My name's Tatterhood. My sister's head has been taken by trolls, and I've come to fetch it back. You're welcome to help, of course." But the king's horseman only said, "Well, good luck to you then. No one's ever dared to go up the Devil's Cliff to the lair of the trolls, and I'll not be the first. The trolls are a curse on this kingdom." Luckily, Tatterhood could always depend on her goat, who was very good at climbing. After clambering up craggy mountain cliffs and scaling the rocky heights of that Devil's Peak, Tatterhood finally found the troll's lair, where she saw her sister's head strung up like a sausage and the trolls still quarrelling over how to cook it. Sneaking up quietly, Tatterhood grabbed her sister's head and made it back to her goat, just as the trolls noticed and came swarming after her. Quickly, Tatterhood jumped with her goat onto a narrow cliff's edge, climbing higher and higher out of reach as the trolls piled up below, trying to catch her. As she thwacked them back down with her spoon, the trolls grew more and more furious, stomping on top of one another until finally, with a great rumbling crash, the rocks broke away and the wicked trolls went tumbling into the sea. "That'll teach you to mess with a girl on a goat," shouted Tatterhood as she waved her spoon in triumph and hugged her sister's head. Hurrying back to the boat, Tatterhood put Rose's old head back on and kissed the forehead, yawning as if just woken up from a nap. Princess Rose blinked her eyes and wiggled her nose, good as new. With the trolls gone, the curse over the land lifted, and the king in the castle rejoiced. Wanting to reward the brave heroes who rescued the kingdom, the king sent his 2 sons, Prince Elder and Prince Younger, to fetch them at once. The princes hurried on their horses to the shore, expecting to find knights in shining armour or an army of troll-fighting warriors. To their surprise, they found a girl galloping on a goat, and no sword or spear in sight. "Ahem! We've come to thank the brave heroes who defeated the trolls. Is there no one else aboard the ship?" said the princes. "Only my sister Rose," said Tatterhood, to the prince's disappointment, expecting another girl on a goat. The princes were pleasantly surprised, however, when the delicate Princess Rose emerged. Prince Younger fell immediately in love. By the time they all arrived back at the castle, wedding plans were underway. But what about Tatterhood? Princess Rose could never be happy without her sister. She hoped Tatterhood would at least consider Prince Elder, who tried presenting her with dresses and jewels and even a new hat. But it was no use. Every time the prince tried speaking to her, Tatterhood thwacked her noisy spoon and her little grey goat butted his knees. Prince Elder was perplexed. He'd only ever read about princesses in books, and none of them ever mentioned goats or wooden spoons. At last, he blurted, "Really, Tatterhood, must you always ride about on that ridiculous old goat? Wouldn't you rather a nice royal pony instead?" "Oh, is it a ridiculous old goat now?" said Tatterhood. "I'll have you know, this goat has warded off palace invasions, climbed up Devil's Cliffs, and sailed the 7 seas. What's your royal horse ever done?" Prince Elder didn't answer. He'd only ever ridden his horse in a parade, and even then its tail had made him sneeze. So instead he said, "Fine, but why then must you always carry that preposterous old spoon?" "Oh, is it a preposterous old spoon now?" said Tatterhood. "I'll have you know this preposterous old spoon has fended off trolls, oared across oceans, and feeds me when I'm hungry too. What's your golden sceptre ever done?" Prince Elder didn't have an answer to that either. His sceptre was a bit useless for how heavy it was, but he didn't want to admit it. So instead he said, "Oh, fine, but what reason could you possibly have for wearing that ugly old hood?" "Oh, is it an ugly old hood now?" said Tatterhood. And then she stopped, unsure of what to say next. In truth, it was an ugly old hood. She'd been made to wear it ever since she could remember, as if she'd needed it, because there might be something wrong with her underneath it. But now that she was a conqueror of trolls, a sailor of 7 seas, and a rescuer of princesses, she wasn't actually sure she did need it. And so she took it off. "I suppose you were right about that one," she said. "It was a bit of an ugly old hood, wasn't it?" Prince Elder didn't answer. He was too busy staring at Tatterhood. He'd never seen hair so wild and untamed, and when he looked at it, he thought it shined brighter than any crown he'd ever seen. And so he said, "Well, at least the goat and spoon were of good use. Perhaps you might show me, then, how to ride a goat and wield a spoon as you do." And at that, Tatterhood smiled. And so she did. The next day, the kingdom celebrated the wedding of Rose and Prince Younger, and not too long afterwards, the wedding of Tatterhood and Prince Elder. Tatterhood never wore another hood again, nor any crown she did not want to, but could always be found galloping through the kingdom on her little grey coat, with her big wooden spoon and her hair wild as tumbleweed in the wind.